I'm going to open this work session of the Eugene School Board. It is a work session to do a training with Alma Advisory Group, and the training is related to our hiring of a permanent superintendent, and it's about being aware, doing this with as much anti-bias as we can be aware and learn about. And I want to just introduce our presenters tonight. We have Monica Rosen from Alma. She'll be the lead presenter. And with us right now is Sydney. And Sydney, your last name is Kaboda? Kabuda?
Kabodi.
Kabodi, thank you. And Sylvia Flowers will be joining us in about 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes. And we're really excited to have them. And they're really, they're adapting a training for us because we do this in a public setting and we are not allowed to have breakout groups. So we just thank you all for doing this for us and for being so flexible with our rules here in Oregon. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you so much, Judy. And I just wanted to check with everyone on the board before we get started. Are you all okay if I refer to you on a first name basis this evening? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us here. For us, it's evening. For you, it's a little earlier in the day. It has been wonderful for us to get to know members of the Eugene 4J community. We've been very just taken by how active and thoughtful so many members of the community have been. People have followed up with us with ideas, and we've really appreciated the engagement and the great conversations we've been having. So I wanted to start by saying thank you for that. As Judy mentioned, tonight is about managing bias. So we're going to have a conversation about the ways in which bias, what bias is, how it occurs, and the way it shows up in a hiring process. But we're also going to talk a little bit about how bias can show up in the workplace as well. This is not a conversation that usually takes place publicly. So I want to acknowledge that this training is inviting each of you to be vulnerable in different ways, to reflect on, your kind of ideas, your experiences, and, to be able to speak openly about what might be some of your biases. And so, we will do the best we can in this forum to have this conversation, but I wanted to prepare you for that, and we'll just see how the conversation goes. I'll be doing some talking, but hoping really to have dialogue with each of you over the course of this meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen, and I can. So the format of our evening is, I'm going to give you all just an update on where we are with the search process, just a quick update. We'll do our anti-bias training, and we'll talk a little bit about the responsibilities and competencies that are in the job description and give you an opportunity to talk, because one of the things that are most important about managing bias is to make sure we're all aligned on the responsibilities we see in the role and the competencies required. Every part of our process will be screening for those things. So this is an opportunity for us to revisit those and to see if there's any difference of opinion among board members. We'd like to be able to talk that through this evening. So Sid, I'm so sorry, Sydney, your bio's not on here. I want to share a little bit about Alma Advisory Group. We are a mission-driven consulting services organization. We work with school systems all over the country, and our work has been really about helping school systems meet their goals for their students. The name Alma is from the Latin word alma, like alma mater. Alma means to foster in Latin, And for us, we see this as your work, not our work. So we're here to really understand what makes Eugene unique in every sense of the way, and to ensure that we're listening and learning before we are offering our expertise as much as possible. And one of the things that really makes Alma unique is our core value that the best answers, the best solutions are hardly ever coming from the top of an organization. They usually come from the people right on the front lines, if you will, the people living the work, the people with the most at stake, the people who are having those experiences every day, positive or negative. They're the ones who tell us what's important, and they help boards like yourselves to make better decisions. So we've engaged with this search with a lot of care and thoughtfulness around community engagement and communications, and we'll continue to do that throughout the search process. Our bios are all on our website, but Kathleen Shiverdecker and Sylvia Flowers and I lead most of our searches. You've gotten to know Sylvia quite a bit. Kathleen's been a little more behind the scenes, but a key member of our team. Sydney Caboti, who's here with us. Sydney, I'd love to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and to share a little bit about how you've been engaging in this process.
Yes, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Nu awachawe zichesh yan absaraga matsua nu Sydney Kabodi yan bahan matsua nu biligyoja wungwa. Hello and good evening. My name is Sydney Kabodi. I'm a child of the Whistling Water clan of the Absaroga Nation. I'm also Winter clan of the Hopi people and Snow clan of the Santa Clara Pueblo. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I've come into Alma as one of the key facilitators in the community forums, and my background is in strategic planning, particularly in regards to addressing some of the concerns and issues in Indian country. I've been doing strategic planning for about 8 years, in specifically just dealing with the concerns in Indian country. But my expertise has translated very well into what Alma does and this mission-driven consulting that they do to illuminate some of the processes of communicating and building consensus in a way that's equitable and a way that really puts the microphone to communities who have been marginalized and underserved historically. And so that's a bit of the background that I bring, and I'm engaging in this process as one of the facilitators and part of the design behind how the community engagement conversations go. So thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. I appreciate that. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is a conversation that's sometimes uncomfortable for people. So, there are a few things that we often lean on to support us for these sessions. And we actually have, I don't know, those of you who might be familiar with Glenn Singleton's work around courageous conversations about race, we find this framework to be helpful for just about everything we do, but in particular when we're talking about bias. And so the first agreement, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these agreements with you. I'm going to ask the group to share which agreements resonate with you and to ask if there are any agreements you want to add to this list. So the first is to stay engaged. When we get uncomfortable with a topic, we disengage. And what that looks like is we start to wonder what's on our cell phone or our email. We feel like we need to walk away or leave the room. Maybe we're hungry, we need a snack. So if you start feeling like you're not paying attention, one thing to consider is to tune in to what's going on in the discussion, and is there anything there that's not sitting well with you or that's making you uncomfortable. And the invitation is to name it if that's the case. It always elevates the discourse when people do that. Along the lines of that is to experience discomfort. This is a conversation where we're all coming in as learners, and it's okay to be out of your comfort zone in this discussion. The third is to speak your truth, your lived experiences, your questions, your concerns, what's on your mind. We want to hear those things. And I just have to name and acknowledge, sometimes that's really hard for white participants in this discussion because they're afraid they're going to say something offensive or wrong or insensitive in this process. And likewise for leaders of color, but sometimes white participants speak less, and we want to have everybody actively participating as much as possible. The final of the 4 agreements is expect and accept non-closure. So we're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight. We're not going to solve racism. You are all going to leave here as biased as you were when you got here, because we all have bias. We'll be learning about that soon, as will I. And so this is, you all have been doing your work around these kinds of topics for years. This dialogue didn't begin tonight and it won't end tonight. So we just want you to have the expectation. Sometimes difficult topics emerge and we're not able to wrap them up with the time that we have. And that's actually okay. So I want to add to this list 3 things, although I realize my second one is not possible actually. The first is to relax and be a learner. So, you're not making decisions as board members this evening. This is for your learning experience. And so we want you to be able to relax into that. Confidentiality is something I always raise, and we know this is a public meeting, but what I will name about this is your colleagues are, what I will add to this idea of confidentiality is your colleagues are saying things. It's really important that board members don't use anything said tonight against each other in any kind of a way. So that would be my request around this. And then finally, that we assume positive intents. People are going to share perhaps thoughts that are not fully formed or fully thought through, and that's okay. So let's we can assume for tonight, everyone has the same goal. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. Everyone's trying to learn in this conversation. So I want to open it up to all of you, and I can't see everyone. So if you can raise your hand, or just take yourself off mute if you want to jump in. I'd love to hear from the group which one of these particularly resonates with you, and whether there is anything you'd like to add to this list. And you can go ahead and just take yourself off mute to participate.
This is Maya, and I'm happy to start. Resonate, I often think it means it makes my heart sing, but it also can mean that it's just kind of reverberating through me. And I want to hold myself to task on rule or guideline, whatever, number 4 about expecting and accepting non-closure. I always am very okay with expecting it. Accepting it is something that's challenging for me. And I think that it goes back to that experience discomfort. I'm less burdened by my own discomfort than I am in witnessing it in others. And that's where I'm driven to want to seek out closure. So I'm just saying it out loud so that I can hold my own self to task on that, accepting that non-closure is more likely than not. So
thank you. Thanks so much, Maya. I really appreciate that. What about others?
Maya, I appreciate what you just said. It's interesting to me that that's the guideline that resonates with me, but maybe even for opposite reasons, or it's the same reason, just with a different hat on or something like that. But I really appreciate the notion of expecting and accepting non-closure, because I think that also leaves this I think there's a tendency in some work to say that like the work happens in the training. And I believe that when it comes to this work, it happens in our lives. And so the idea that this is not closed means that there's a doorway out into the rest of our lives and into the work that we continue to do, and that we take this along with us and that the work continues. And so I find that both, challenging at times and also really comforting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martina.
So
Judy?
this is Judy, yeah. The one that really jumped out for me or resonated for me that I'm glad is on the list, but is to assume positive intent. And I think that openness and really assuming everyone is here to learn and learn more about each other and ourselves mostly in a really open and relaxed way. So, which is hard to say again when you're doing this in public, but that's my great hope.
That's great. Thank you so much, Judy. Anyone else want to share?
I think this is Gordon. I think I would say about the non-closure, both that it seems totally realistic or obvious even that we're not going to have closure at the end of tonight, but also not just kind of personally frustrating, but I feel like some of these issues are things that we as a board have been talking, struggling, sometimes, fighting about. And it feels like we need to get to not like the total grand closure, but some kind of more agreement about moving forward. And so it makes sense that's not going to happen tonight, but then I feel like I'm going to be left thinking, okay, but when is that going to happen, or is that going to happen?
I appreciate that, Gordon, and I appreciate you're saying that it's that not sitting well in certain ways. And I totally hear you on this idea that there are things we need to do as a board. So let's be opportunistic where those topics come up, and we feel like we can either dig into them or we can make a plan, to work on them later. My hope, similar to what Martina said, is that you get some tools tonight that you're able to use in future discussions, not definitely for the search itself, but perhaps equally as important in your work with each other, your decision making, and also how you engage your permanent superintendent. So thank you for that. Did anyone have an agreement you'd like to add to this list?
I don't have an agreement. I just wanted to follow up. Something I haven't been accused of is being silent in trainings, because I think really when you share your truth, that's how you do the work. And to that end, I don't know how you do that when you're an elected official on a Zoom meeting that anybody can pop in and out of, with a board that we don't assume positive intent. So it's really hard, because I want to call that out, because if I'm sitting back quiet, it's because I have I don't mind feeling the discomfort is important. I have learned so much just being willing to be vulnerable, say things, address things, speaking who I am and my truth in ways I've never done on this board before. But there's no way I assume a positive intent at all. Not just because of who's on the board, but because of who's listening. You say, let's promise we won't use this. We know that doesn't matter. It will be used. So I guess I just want to honor the fact that you're going to do this training, and we're going to smile and we're going to act like it's all good. But we're going to work really hard to take something away, because this is not a good way to do this training. So we're going to have to work extra hard. I'm probably going to be extra quiet, and it's not because I'm a white person not willing to talk about things that I don't understand. So I just want to be clear, since you threw that out there. But this isn't a good way to do this training. And I think we know that, and we're just going ahead with it anyway, because that's what we have to do as electeds. But to pretend it's all good just doesn't sit right for me. So I just wanted to speak that truth. Thank you.
Well, thank you for speaking your truth, Alicia. I appreciate it. And,
Oh.
you know, we understand that you do have to moderate what you say as an elected official in a public meeting. And I acknowledge the challenge in that. As we get through the content, I think you'll have a better idea of what feels, you know, possible to share or not. In terms of assuming positive intent, I'm asking you to assume that of each other when you're listening to each other. And I'm asking you to do that for this evening. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, you have to make your own choice around your participation. And I respect that. Did anyone want to respond to Alicia's comment?
I was going to say, this is Mary. I was going to say something about speaking your truth, but after
Yeah.
what she said, I just want to say I agree with Alicia. It's very difficult here.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a common trust among us for a variety of reasons, which is too bad, but that's just the way it is. And I hope that people can at least treat each other with respect during this meeting. And I'm fully aware that, you know, whatever I might say, if someone takes offense at it, will be used against me. But that's the risk I'm willing to take. But it is hard to speak your truth when I feel like the vultures are circling sometimes, you know, just waiting for me to say the wrong word at the wrong time. But I'm here and I want to learn, and I know that I'm not bias free. I hope that we can apply this to other aspects of our board work too, rather than just this specific example of our search for a permanent superintendent. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. You know, those are difficult things that are being shared, and I really appreciate Mary and Alicia for naming them. One of the things for Alma that's really important when we do superintendent searches is that you can't do a search well unless there's alignment among all the board members. Like, you all at least have to agree what you're seeking in this next leader. But you also have to know that your candidates, they're watching your engagement in board meetings, they're watching how you interact with each other and how you interact with staff. All these things, as you said, Alicia, are public information. And I want to acknowledge the self-reflection that trust is an issue on the board. If it is really important for you all to really do some work on that, because you can't show up well for your leader, for your superintendent, if you can't show up well for each other. And so, you know, I think that's something for us to really take. It's in the critical path of our superintendent search. So we need to think about that. And what I'll say, I just will name, you know, when we led the Denver Public Schools board superintendent search, there was lots of public scrutiny over the board as being dysfunctional. And one of the things the board did was they took on work to really clarify their role in the superintendent's role and their rules of engagement with each other. And the mere fact that they were willing to do that work was very comforting to candidates, because superintendent candidates know their job is 10 times more difficult if their board is not trusting or in alignment with each other. So I just want to name that for you all, and you know, happy to discuss with Judy or anyone else if there are other ways we can, you know, work on some of these things while we're carrying out the search. Any reactions to what I shared? Anyone who hasn't spoken on this topic that wants to say something?
I guess this is Gordon again. You know, just on the last, at some point, whether it's tonight or another point, I feel like it would be useful to, if you could spell out some of what that process might look like of coming to agreement on rules of engagement, because I agree with everything that Alicia said, and I know that what you said as well is true. Not, you know, not just for our own sake of figuring out how to operate well, but for you know, being a good and attractive partner to prospective candidates. and maybe there's a way that we could actually come to agreement on some kind of, rules of how we want to do this process, even though there remain a lot of other things that we disagree on. But I don't really know what that process would look like. And I don't know if that's in Alma's job description or if that's part of what we hired you for or not, but it would be helpful to get some of that.
I love that. I'd say, I think that's a conversation worth having. If not beginning it tonight, I'll work with Judy to see how we can do that and what I would see as the best way to get to that point. I do think having rules of engagement for the search would be extremely helpful to the process and to the board to kind of try out different ways of working together and making decisions. And, as facilitators, we work really hard on that to just make sure everyone's voice is heard and valued and honored, and that the group is really holding each other to the things you all agree to, your shared agreements. So thank you for saying that, Gordon. And thank you, everyone. I know, Alicia, you said you wouldn't speak your truth, but you did a beautiful demonstration of speaking your truth. So I appreciate it. Okay. So I am going to talk through the search process, and I want to start by your shared purpose. So we've been sharing with the community, but we want you all to critique this statement and see if there's anything you want to add or change here. That your goal is to recruit, screen, and select the next permanent superintendent of Eugene School District 4J, and that your shared purpose is to lead a transparent search process guided by the input of the board and the 4J community, and designed to mitigate bias every step of the way. It's really important to us, and when we meet with your community, that they know at the end of the day, the decision lies on your shoulders, nobody else. But the voice of the community is incredibly informative and helpful in the process. And we want people to feel they have access to the process, they understand what's going on. And that they have different ways of sharing their input throughout. That said, I'd love to get your thoughts on anything you would add or change about either of these two sentences. Is there anything missing, anything you think is important to add or change?
Transparent search process. I understand what I think it means. I guess I want something in there about communication as well, which I know that is part of transparent, but we have problems with communication in our district, and I think it would be helpful if this is something that is going out to the public, that we talk about the communication part in some way, or just explain transparent a little bit. That's my only thought on that.
Yeah, so what suggestion would you make here to have it be more clear?
The only thing I had thought of, and I know you want to keep this tight, but our purpose is to communicate clearly and to lead a transparent search process.
Yeah. Do others agree with that change? Anyone disagree with that change?
I'm not going to die on the hill over it, but I don't see why we need to try to solve what is perceived to be a problem with our shared goal statement. I don't think that relates to the search process, but I'm not going to argue anymore. I'm speaking my truth. That's it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of to Gordon's point earlier about making sure you're all on the same page about how you want to lead this search. So if communicating clearly about the process is important to the board, then it should be in this statement. It's sort of like it's like Alma's direction and guidance, but it's also something we come back to every time we come together. Alicia?
Thanks. So to Laurel's point, I think what it is transparent means different to different people and how you get there. And communication is a tool to get to that transparency. So I don't know if it would be helpful so that maybe there's other things in that concept of a transparent search that goes with communication that we could flesh out as a group. So maybe it doesn't go in our statement, but it does get us to that shared goal, just kind of shared understanding. So anyway, just a thought. I am not the wordsmith, never have been, never will be. But I just feel it's deeper than communication, and this may be a good place to start. What does transparent mean?
Yeah, and Alicia, I'm so sorry, my screen froze for a second there. So did you say maybe we should define what we mean by transparent?
Yes, and it may not be your screen. My Wi-Fi, I'm noticing, is cutting out. So
Okay.
Thanks for asking for clarification.
Yeah, Gordon, jump in.
Thank you. I want to raise something that is a little hard and a little uncomfortable to raise. One of the things that is, both a plus and a challenge in the search is that we have an internal candidate. We have our interim superintendent, who is one of the candidates to be the permanent superintendent, who I think we all think, very highly of. And I presume, I don't know, we may be at different places about, the extent to which we just wish that we could have not had a search and just appoint the interim superintendent as permanent versus having a search. I don't want to, and I think there have been times when I don't know if this has happened, but I've worried that there are things happening, not even by the board, but sometimes in the district, that would make it harder for somebody from the outside to come in if they're coming into a situation where they feel like the senior staff or some of the senior staff of the district they're going to be coming into a place that is not welcoming, or that wishes that somebody else was chosen. And I don't really know what to do about that. I think it's important for us as a board not to be worrying that anything under the surface could be happening like that. And I think it's important for outside candidates to feel like this is a genuinely open search and there's nothing happening in the district that would try to solidify something that would make it there would be any kind of like poison pill or make it unwelcome for them to come in. So this is kind of like what Alicia said, like, I don't really know what to do about this, but I wanted to say it out loud, because to me, that's, part of the, even our goal is to recruit, screen, and select. And sometimes it feels like, well, are there sometimes some moves that make, we'd rather kind of have the process not work that well because we're not actually that interested in recruiting somebody from the outside.
Thank you. I have two key. First is around your internal candidate, and internal candidates are something that the Alma team really take part. Several of us in Alma's leadership have been candidates and felt treated not so great. So it's really important to us that internal candidates are communicated with clearly throughout the process, and given feedback, just like all candidates get feedback as they're getting through every stage. This is not a gotcha kind of a thing. And sometimes internal candidates will have biases for them or against them because they're known to you. They're not the shiny new person that's, got a bow wrapped around them and is perfect. I just want to say that about internal candidates. To your point about wanting to be open and welcoming to outside candidates, you use the word genuinely open search, and I really like that. So I'm going to suggest putting it up here and just try it on and see what you think. I'm wondering if we say this instead of recruit, screen, and select.
So I like that language. I don't think this is something that we have to put it in language, but one of the things you said reminded me that I also think it's important to, all through this process, to make sure the process also plays out in a way that it is respectful and honors the current interim superintendent, because that is a hard position to be in going through this. And so I don't know that we need to put that in writing, but.
Yeah, that's great. And we can take that on and see that as a charge for us. Before we move on, I wanted to, oh, go ahead, Judy. Yeah.
I had another phrase in here that I think about a lot and I don't know exactly what to do with, but it's the one about guided by the input of the board and the 4J community. So I struggle some with really trying to figure out the 4J community, what really, because I think we really make every attempt to get outreach and get participation, but are we talking about the loudest voices? Are we talking about the majority? Are we talking about people closer to the process? Are we talking about voices we don't typically hear? In some ways, I think we're talking about all of the above, but how do we know we get really a broad and fair view of our community? I mean, I don't know that anyone has an answer, but I struggle with that a lot.
I think that's a really important clarification and necessary, especially given your values from the start of this search to be as inclusive as possible. And what I've heard from the board, Judy, is to have a process that we get to hear from the people that we don't always, that we sometimes don't get to hear from, as well as everybody else, right? But so that's my understanding from the board. Anyone have a recommendation or an ad there that would make that clear? And I know it feels like, okay, we're wordsmithing this one paragraph and how long is this not going to be? But I actually think it's so valuable to hear what each of you cares about in this process. So I think it's worth the time. I'll move us on soon, but any thoughts on how to reflect what Judy is saying about the community and how you're defining the community? Yeah, Laurel.
Well, I don't think this is a direct correlation, but my thought was 4J community and then the board for this, because we are part of the community. So to put the community first, let's kind of shows that we see them first. I don't know. I don't think I quite understood what you were saying, Judy, as far as, because I don't know how to tease out all the different parts without making a novel out of this paragraph. But I did, when I'm looking at this, I did see some of, and tell me if I'm wrong, please. I don't like to put words in people's mouths, but I did see some of what you were saying in that input of the 4J community and the board, and with the design to mitigate bias at every step of the way is pretty powerful statement. It's kind of that foundational equity piece I continually talk about. And for that to be part of it, I think it lets people know that all voices will be valued. It just does, it does, I mean, we just need to get the information to them, like this paragraph to everybody, you know? I don't know exactly where this goes.
I like this. What do you think of this?
I really like that shift and folding the board into the greater component of community. I think that feels really good to me. I also I think that it also comes back to those roles where we assume good intention. So you know, to think that we would not be including or valuing every single voice of the community is. I'm not comfortable with that, because I think that we shouldn't even play around with which voices matter. We should just take the assumption that all voices matter. I hope, and it comes back to that communicating and transparency, that we are able to make it clear to the community that whether you've been somebody who has had a lot of input or whether you have never offered input before, your voice has equal value in this process.
Maybe we should say where all voices are equally valued. What do you think?
I like the 4J community are valued. I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Simple enough. Okay, great. I think this looks really good to me. And I like the adjustments that we made. You know, Sylvia spoke with each of you one-on-one, and in the conversations I've had with you, I feel like this reflects what we've been hearing. Want to give anyone a chance if there's anything else you want to add or change, or anything that you feel might still be missing? Yeah, Alicia.
Thanks. I think that's great, but when we hear that not everybody feels their voice is being heard, how do we deal with that? And I think that's the big question for our board. So when I'm starting to hear people don't feel like they're being cut off or they aren't being heard in these community meetings, what do we do with that? Because that's coming. And then the other thing I want to just address, Gordon's a generally open search that you put on there. What I know is anytime there's an internal candidate, and I've certainly experienced this in my personal life in jobs, it does lessen the number of people that will apply. That's just part of it. People are making calculated guesses. So I think putting that there is important. But I think what's more important, and Gordon kind of alluded to, maybe there might be something going on. So I just want to say, for me, I believe in a fair and open process. And that is something I will always work for, and not just towards, for, and we'll call it out if I feel it's not happening. So I don't know. I mean, the words are great, but I think the statement from board members, all of us, to say it's a fair and open process is what is really important for me to put forward. Thanks.
I like that a lot, Alicia.
I also have a point of clarification. Maybe other board members are privy to information that I haven't received, but I don't think we've been informed of any candidacies yet. I mean, we're taking it for granted that our interim superintendent will be applying, but I don't think we should take it for granted that anyone is applying until those applications are, you know, available to us. And I would hope that the folks who are watching this process, you know, are feeling that that's the case. Until somebody indicates that they should be treated just like anybody else, from my perspective. But again, I might not be privy to some information that other people have, but I don't, and if that is the case, I think we should be careful about sharing information prematurely before it is, you know, our search process is supposed to be confidential, which should include to protect the current superintendent from her decision in this whole experience as well.
That's a very fair point, Maya. And we do not share candidate names we wait as long as possible to share candidate names as part of our way of mitigating bias in the process. And I think it's very fair not to assume one way or the other who's actually going to be applying. So I think that's an excellent point. Thank you. All right, any final words?
I just wanted to second my appreciation for fair and open search process. I think that does get to the heart of it a little bit more than genuine. So I appreciate that wordsmithing. Thank you, Alicia.
I like it too.
Can I raise one last thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not about the board, and so we're here talking about ourselves. But we had our survey went out to the public that started, or the announcement of the survey started with a paragraph reminding people that the current interim superintendent has been chosen twice by the board. She has been chosen twice, and for good reason. But I think and this was not from the current superintendent, but I just think it's important that the communication staff also take care to to put out any communications related to the search in a way that's equally respectful to anybody who might be a candidate for the search.
Very helpful. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move us on, if that's okay. Take us back to this presentation. And I want to just share with everyone where we are in the search process. So we did not want to lose time on getting out there to candidates who are actively seeking roles. So in January, I think it was in January or maybe December, we did get a posting out there for the role, informed heavily by the board. What we're really focused on in the month of January, Alma is out there recruiting candidates as much as possible. But these community gatherings that are taking place are a big priority in the month of January. We want to meet with, as you all said, as many people as possible, especially those that often are either excluded or difficult to reach. So we're very interested in community members who have ideas on how we can do that. And we've had some come through communications directly to Alma about that. We really, really appreciate that. For us, January going into February is our top recruitment time. So we're building interest for the role, we're answering candidates' questions, and hopefully there are people, with every search, there are people who might not have been actively looking for a new role, but you know, are really inspired by the specific needs of the role and end up applying, as well as those who just find out about us through our regular postings. We're hoping that by early to mid-February, we'll be able to begin interviewing candidates, and we'll have more conversation about what the rounds of interviewing will look like. Typically, we lead the first round, and typically by the second round, members of the board are engaged, sometimes all members of the board. So we'll have some decisions to make around that. We would expect and hope that we would get to the point of identifying finalists by somewhere around mid-March. And typically we have 2 to 3 finalists that are announced. And this would be the time when we would come back to the community to have a final interview process where members of the community are able to meet candidates and able to provide their input. Hopefully we'd have a final selected candidate ready to announce by April. So that's generally, that's the arc of what we're hoping to do here. Any questions around that?
I have a question. I know it's been talked about that in past searches, some number of members of the board went out to visit the current home community of either one or a couple of finalists. And I don't know if we've settled if that's part of what's our process or if we need to talk about that tonight. It seems to me it would be really valuable to do that, but so we can put it off if it's not for tonight. I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you for that. It's not, we're not talking through the screening steps tonight, but we will need to do that soon. So we'll make sure to come back to that possibility and where people's interests are there.
That issue was raised at the subcommittee level.
Okay, thank you. Alicia, I see your hand up.
I know we're not talking through it, but just to throw it out, we're in January or in February and March, you said some or maybe all of the board. I'm just going to save you some time. Just put all of the board. That's who we are. We will, I'm guessing we'll all want to be part of that.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, so where we are, we're gathering input from the community. We have the survey that's out. I'm going to share the number of surveys that have already been completed. We've launched the job description and we're recruiting candidates. In the next few weeks, we're really focused on synthesizing the community input, what we've heard in our focus groups, and working with you all on our interview protocols, our interview steps. Alma always designs the interview guides. I would say, actually a better way to say it is we co-construct the interview guides with the board. And so that's something that we'll be wanting to do with you all in the weeks ahead. Want to share a little bit about the different activities to participate. So we've got over 1,700 surveys completed to date, which is wonderful. We're really happy about that. We'll be looking to see what the demographics are of who's participating, and sometimes we create additional outreach if we feel like the participation isn't as comprehensive as we're looking for. We have 5 community gatherings or forums that were planned. We've completed 2 already. And we're working with the board and with the communications team to organize a number of focus groups and interviews. We want to meet with teachers. We're really excited to meet with your students, principals, staff, and your community partners. So those are really the 3 different ways that people can participate. Alma's email is info@almaadvisorygroup.com. We have had some people reach out to us there as well, and we're always open to any thoughts, ideas people want to share, whatever format is best for them. I do think we've confirmed it's going to be monolingual in Spanish. So I'll be leading that night, so we won't need translators unless they're translating from Spanish to English. That's really important to us, that people can speak in their own language and share their perspective in their own language. And we're planning that for January 25th at this time. We use community input in 3 important ways. One is we will absolutely go back to the job description itself and say there are things that we missed and ask the board to make adjustments. And those things then inform how we are recruiting and how we're screening candidates. We also leverage the examples that are shared by stakeholders when we're designing aspects of the screening process. And the community input following engagement with finalists will be shared with the board as they make their final, as you all make your final decision. All right, so now we get to the fun part. We're going to begin the anti-bias training, and I'm going to start going back to those agreements and norms. We'll have a short warm-up exercise, and then we'll have a conversation about what bias is and how this process mitigates bias. So in a moment, first, just a little background. Facebook created a whole basically set of videos and tools and materials around managing bias. They developed it for their own staff and then decided to put it out in the world open source for free. So it's at managingbias.fb.com. This is their, I'm going to show you a snapshot of their video, but encourage anyone to check it out. There's lots of good stuff on there, and I'm grateful to Facebook for doing it. And they did it because they were trying to manage bias within Facebook. So I'm going to introduce you, actually, I'm not going to introduce you. There are 5 people who are going to come on the screen, and they're going to introduce themselves. And what I want you to do is I want you to pick one that you would be interested in speaking with about the superintendency in Eugene 4J. Now, I don't want you to overthink this. We know in real life you never make a decision just based on how someone introduces themselves, but we want you to really consider what you like and what that first impression is with each of these individuals, what you like, what you don't like. So I'm going to show the video, and I'm going to ask each of you to pick who you would want to invite for a conversation about the Eugene superintendency. And I'm going to do this.
Hi, my name is Mary Jo Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kumar. It's nice to meet you.
I'm Sandra. Nice to meet you.
Hey, I'm Simon. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Dustin Holt, and it's nice to meet you.
All right. So the question for you all is, who did you choose and why? I'm going to give you a moment. I'm going to show you their pictures and their names again, and we'll discuss who you chose and why, and what are some things, and then we'll have a broader conversation about what we tend to look for when we're meeting candidates for a new role. So here are their names and their faces once more. Go ahead and just make a note on your own. Who would be the one person you would choose and why you chose them? And I'll also ask if there's anyone you definitely would not choose and why you definitely would not choose them.
Sorry, is this to pick somebody who's a potential candidate for the job or somebody at a community candidate for the job?
Yes, this is someone that we would want to talk to about the candidacy, about the role for superintendent. Okay, are we ready? So who wants to share? Who did you pick and why?
I'll go ahead and go first.
Thanks, Mary.
I picked Simon.
All right.
Just because he sent me a open, welcome vibe of competence.
I love it. Thank you, Mary. Who else?
I picked Andrew.
Okay.
I was looking at presentation as well, so wasn't too informal in presentation, but his intro was very warm.
So I think Laurel's looking at my notes because I picked Andrew and I put the word warm, so like literally the same word. He just, it kind of presented himself with a little bit of, or a lot bit of warmth that pulled me in and felt like it would be somebody that I would feel confident to be able to make myself vulnerable to talk with him about the things that I would like to be able to openly discuss.
Thank you, Maya.
I picked Sanja, and it was a toss-up between Andrew and Sanja, I have to say. But Sanja, when she approached, at first, she just seemed very self-assured, and then she gave me a very warm smile, and then I felt pulled in and welcomed.
For me, I was torn between Sanja and Mary Jo, kind of for different reasons. Sanja was that she had that pause, I don't know, in between saying the first thing and continuing, that made me think that she was thinking about things and like had something to say other than just the normal superficial, hi, great to meet you. And Mary Jo, because she was a fast talker and I relate to fast talkers.
Awesome. Thank you, Gordon.
I'll admit that I am apparently part of this unconscious club of writing warm next to Andrew's name. That's the person I gravitated towards, and I think I was, as I was looking at the words that I wrote for each, I was just thinking that like warmth is one of the qualities I admire in a leader, someone who's able to be really warm even while they're at the, at the helm. So that's something that just drew me.
Awesome. Thank you, Martina. Who else?
So first 10 years of my career, I was in employment and training. So I work with people on that. And so I get a little drawn more to what they're wearing. And Simon's a Cal fan, folks. How could you vote for him? And a man bun, a Mary Jo. I mean, so he, you ask for this false push, but am I meeting him at a picnic or am I meeting him for the job? Because there's only one person dressed for a superintendent's job. So we have to work on the others. But if I'm just meeting him casually, I gotta go with Sanja because she just intrigued me as someone who I think would be true to who she is if she's coming to meet us with the shirt she has on, the jacket she has on.
Great. Did we hear from everyone? I think we did. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So nobody picked Dustin. Why not? Yeah, Martina.
So I thought about that as I was writing it because he was the person who I sort of put like last in my interest category. And I think it's because I don't feel, I'm not drawn to formality, and he felt really formal. And I think it makes me feel uncomfortable when I feel someone is really formal and I just as a human am not. It makes me feel like self-conscious and really young. And so that's like the place that I come to from my own discomfort and my own insecurities. And so I was not drawn towards him for those reasons.
Thank you for that, Martina. I appreciate your saying that and sharing that. Yeah, go ahead, Maya.
He was also last on my list, and it's kind of, he was kind of the polar opposite of Andrew for me on that one. I feel as though I didn't get that like that feeling that this is somebody that I could be vulnerable with, and this isn't. It didn't feel like someone. And if I don't feel as though I can be vulnerable, I don't necessarily feel like I can go to that next step of feeling trusting. And it just felt like a shield of a kind of type, a kind of closed offness that's built on a type of self-assuredness that a different flavor of it is very inspiring, and that flavor that comes from Dustin makes me feel nervous that it kind of has like an I have the ideas and here's how we're going to do it, like, you know, at band camp, we did it this way, so now we're going to be doing it this way here type of feeling.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
I just would add one thing very short about Dustin. It just didn't feel genuine.
Yeah. Excellent. I really appreciate that. Often Mary Jo, our woman in red, gets fewer votes, and Dustin is usually in trouble, but sometimes people do like Dustin. And so this is what's really interesting about this exercise. You know, essentially, what you see is that with just a few seconds of someone walking up and introducing themselves, and we know this is a simulation, and like Alicia said, like we would never do this in real life. But the truth of the matter is you were able to have kind of whole stories about each of these individuals, who they were and how they made you feel, right? Someone was warm, had deep warmth to them. I would feel confident. I could make myself vulnerable. Simon had a vibe of confidence around it. You know, sent me an open welcome vibe. You know, Sanja made a pause, and based on her jacket, you have this feeling that, you know, she's a thoughtful person and, you know, she's going to be herself. I was intrigued by her, you know, and then absolutely, some people love the man bun, some people don't love the man bun. So it's interesting because someone said Andrew was not too informal. And sometimes people think Andrew is a little too informal because of the man bun. So that causes issues. And with Mary Jo as well, sometimes people feel she's too formal because of the red suit, that she's coming on strong in some kind of a way, similar to sort of what people had to say about Dustin. What no one said about Dustin, but we get a lot in this exercise, is that he felt like he came into my space in a way that the other people didn't, that he kind of violated my personal space on the screen. He kind of came up too close, and I didn't like that about him. You know, so it's just really interesting how we all form impressions of people. And that's really what this warm-up exercise is intended to demonstrate for us. So, you know, what I want to share is a little bit about what bias actually is. And so I'm going to talk for a minute about this. So the reality is that bias is part of the human makeup and our evolution. It's part of our survival, and we rely on it every day for a million different decisions and things that we do. It's part of our subconscious brain that makes decisions on our behalf. So if you think of the brain as the subconscious and the conscious brain, the conscious brain simply works a whole lot slower, takes in information much more slowly, makes decisions much more slowly. The subconscious brain has lots of these neural pathways that have been well worn and made up over time so that you can make decisions without really having to think about them. So one way to think about your subconscious brain is anyone who commutes to work, not that many of us aren't doing that right now, but you commute to work, you're walking to work, you're driving to a place that you go to all the time. You just kind of know how to get there. You know, you can listen to the radio and do other things and get yourself where you're familiar with, because at the end of the day, your subconscious brain is already familiar and wired to know like all the things you need to do. Or even driving, for those who drive. As I'm a New Yorker, I drive. I'm a born and raised New Yorker where lots of people actually don't drive. But as a driver, right, you know when to brake, you know where to look before you turn. There are like a million things that you do, but that you don't have to like consciously decide to do because you just know it. And so it is with bias. Bias, it sort of comes from the time in our human species development where you had to quickly surmise, is something a threat to me? Do I need to run? Is this a predator? Or is this not a danger to me? Is this a tiger that's about to eat me, or is it a rabbit, right? And maybe I need to eat the rabbit. So, you know, there are these things that allow us to, as soon as we see somebody, as soon as we meet a person, to make some immediate judgments about them. And those judgments are developed over time by our upbringing, by our community, by our surroundings, by the things we see and experience every day on TV, in all sorts of, on the advertisements, on all sorts of things. And a lot of those messages, frankly, we don't even notice when we're getting them. One of my favorite examples is I was watching the animated film Brave. I don't know if anyone with little kids, the right age, will know this movie. And it's this super like power girl movie. You know, you've got this girl with wild red hair and she wants to be an archer. She's a princess. She doesn't want to have to marry, you know, she doesn't want to be married. So there are all these, you know, themes that are about empowerment. I was watching the movie with my kids, and spoiler alert, you know, there's an issue that occurs where her mom turns into a bear. And if they don't figure things out soon enough, she's going to stay a bear. And there's a bad bear in the movie. So here's what I noticed. The bad bear has darker brown fur than the mom bear. The mom bear has lighter brown fur. And the bad bear has very kind of rough fur. It's kind of, just rough, where the mom's fur is very smooth and silky. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because the movie is associating a darker brown with being less predictable, more dangerous, unsafe. And there it was. And I had to point it out to my kids, but here my kids could be watching this and just never really get this very implicit message about color in what seems like a very innocuous situation. And so our biases really are caused by the stereotypes that are reinforced in our daily lives. And all of us have them. When, there's an article I'll send to you after today, right? It was a story of a small Latinx woman coming out of a big fancy house. Do we assume she's the owner of the house, or do we think she's like a worker, an employed person in that house? I myself have been gardening in front of my house and have had people ask me if I take clients, but I'm in front of my house, it's my house. And they assume I'm a gardener, I'm like paid help. And that comes from whatever I look like to them based on what they think when they see me. And so we kind of have to know that some of these things are really hardwired for us. And it's not just for white people, it's for all people, for leaders of color, for people of color, as well as for white people, because we've all kind of grown up in the society that, frankly, in the US has really centered in a lot of ways on showing us white men in particular as being in leadership roles, as making the tough decisions, being the brave ones, being the ones in the, being the saviors, the heroes, more times than not. And so as women and as women of color, we often don't see ourselves as leaders compared to white males. Or if we're dealing with a leader of color, we might just question them a little more than we might question someone else. So I want to go back to something Maya said, right? And Martina too, right? Martina talked about, I'm self-conscious about my age. And so certain things make me feel more comfortable or less comfortable. Or Maya saying, this person pulled me in, I felt like I could be vulnerable with them, right? So if I feel safe around someone, if I have a certain feeling that they're warm in some kind of a way, it's a lot easier for me to trust them and to trust what they're saying to me. If I'm not so sure about someone, they're going to have to work a lot harder to convince me that they're capable, that what they're saying is trustworthy and true. And that's the danger of a bias, because what ends up happening, in particular in a hiring process, but we'll talk more about in the workplace as well, is that we make people, we second guess leaders of color. And if we are leaders of color, sometimes we second guess ourselves. We don't always give everyone the same level of respect or trust or autonomy that we give to others. And that's based on our own personal lived experiences. I want to share a few different types of bias that are out there, and then I'll pause for a reaction and comments from the group. So there are 4 common biases that we like to talk about when we're talking about hiring. The first is performance bias, which is bias based on stereotyped expectations of performance between men and women. I'm actually going to put this together with performance attribution because they sort of go hand in hand. The idea is that oftentimes when things are going well and there's a male leader, we'll make an assumption that they're a really good leader and that that's why things went well. When we have a woman leader or a leader of color, when things go well, we don't assume it's their leadership. We assume they had help, they had support, they got lucky. So we don't give people the same credit for their results because we assume somehow it wasn't all them that did it. On the opposite side of things, when things go badly, we take that as evidence of lack of competence, evidence that the leader is not strong when it comes to women and leaders of color. And what we do find is with men, with white men in particular, if things don't go well, we'll assume they were unlucky. Something happened that was out of their control or someone else's fault, not theirs. So it kind of goes both ways. The other kind of bias is this competency and likability trade-off. Now, so my son has high functioning autism. And one of the things we talk about is expected behaviors and unexpected behaviors. And this is sort of like that. So basically, if we're expecting someone to be more in a, if we're expecting someone to be a certain way and they act a different way, then it kind of rubs us the wrong way because it's going against what we expect. And I'll tell you a story, something that happened to me. I was coaching an individual and I had someone who was observing the coaching, and the coaching was difficult. It wasn't going well. And so this person, wanted to give me feedback on my behavior or what things I could do to improve the coaching relationship. And what that person said was, Monica, you're so articulate, so well put together, you're so organized, you're prepared for every conversation. And I want you to know, and I'm thinking, okay, this sounds like it's going the right direction. She says, I want you to know that's intimidating to people. And I thought, intimidating? That's a really interesting conclusion, that I would be articulate and well prepared and organized doesn't inspire trust. It feels threatening. That my competence is unexpected and therefore it rubs people the wrong way. And that is the truth, right? That was how she was receiving me in that moment. And this is what the likability trade-off is. And so part of that is maternal bias, where we expect women to be more focused on family and to play more nurturing mother-like roles than men. So we'll assume they're somehow less committed to their careers. We'll ask them how they do it all if they have children. We expect them to be the ones to bring treats to the office or to do the office housekeeping, take notes. And, for the most part, people have gotten past some of that. But actually, that's a real thing. We wonder if a woman is a certain age, is she going to have babies? And is she going to be able to, or if she mentioned she's got a newborn, is she really going to be able to do a job like a superintendent job, which takes so much work? And these are the kinds of things. It causes us to question their credibility, but it also causes us to, if they're acting in a way we don't expect, maybe they're assertive, maybe they give you difficult feedback, we don't feel like they're developing us. We feel like they're disrespecting us. So what I see in the workplace, and I coach a number of leaders of color, is that feedback can be catastrophized. I can't believe they said this thing to me. I felt undervalued and so disregarded because they told me I was doing something that I could do it better. And then compliments are dismissed. No reply. I thought you did a great job today. No reply to that. People just don't put as much value in the positive things you have to say, but then they go to a really dark place with negative things you have to say. And that's all part of that kind of what we're expecting to see versus what people actually do. how they act compared to our bias, what our bias has taught us to expect from people. So I've said a whole lot. That's the end of my little lecture burst. I would love to hear what thoughts or reactions you have. What things have you witnessed? Where have you maybe experienced this or seen others treated this way? What do you think are some of the ways this might show up in a hiring process? So let's just have a conversation. And I can't see everyone, so just take yourself off mute or raise your hand and you'll come up to the top of my screen. Hi, Martina.
Well, I'll jump in. I shared the self-consciousness and the sort of discomfort that I feel based on my own insecurities having to do with age. And that is specifically because of age-based bias and gender-based bias that I have definitely experienced. During my campaign, I was told explicitly that there was no chance that I could be a leader in the district because I have no children and I'm too young to manage somebody who is older than me and someone who understands more about children. And those are the kinds of comments I've received many times in my life. I'm not even that young anymore. And so, I shared that example earlier because I think it's, for me, something that I really notice is a response that I have to the experiences that I've lived through, and also can potentially lead to my own bias, right? Can be one of the things that feeds that, right? Is my discomfort and my self-consciousness and the experiences that I've had leading me to expect to receive that same treatment in future. So, the sort of feedback loop that can create is unhelpful to everybody involved.
Yeah, Martina, one of the big discoveries of my life was I was working with a group of people and I really felt treated like a subordinate every time I was with them, even though my results were really good. And what I realized was, yes, they were treating me like a subordinate, but I was creating the space and I was entering the space like I was a subordinate, like I had something to prove, and really, in a certain way, actually creating the opening for people to treat me that way because I saw myself that way. And it's a difficult thing to realize, right? Because I want to just be mad at them. But I realized I wasn't owning my own space. I wasn't owning what I was good at or, any of that. And often so nervous coming together with them thinking, like they've been around longer. They, I don't know, like I had something to prove. And that's, of course, we all talk about imposter syndrome, but that's a little bit what it's about, right? It's that same bias working against yourself. And like you said, not great for anyone, because then you're coming from a space that's like your truth, even though it's not. And it makes it okay for other people, or you expect and wait for other people to treat you that way. So then when they do, you might have a strong reaction or something like that.
Well, and I'll say also that because I expect those things and prepare myself in advance and do present myself with a lot of confidence, I also think that like competency, likability trade-off experience happens where I've had a lot of people who are very shocked about my presentation of myself, or who I have had similar comments about being off-putting or too directive, and things like that, because the expectation for a 30-something married woman is that I would just go have babies, which is not a choice that I've made.
Yeah.
So I think all of those pieces, even being aware of those things and not putting myself in that same, like not going in with that same mind space, still has that negative trade-off potentially.
Yeah. Thank you. Sylvia, I saw your hand raised for a second. I wasn't sure if you wanted to chime in and share something, or was that an accident? There you are. Hi.
I was thinking about how I see it play out in an interview process. And I was thinking about the performance bias or performance attribution when certain candidates are, they're judged by their expected performance and other people have to keep proving. And so when I see this in an interview process, for me, it looks like when you have the question and then people keep digging for more evidence, as opposed to like just listening to what the candidate is saying. That's one way that I've seen it play out in our interview processes from time to time.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, Sylvia. It's absolutely true. We will see two individuals with very similar background and experiences, and the questions raised about each will be very different. And so, people will ask about a woman, how will she speak up for herself? Will she be able to manage a board and stakeholders? And a male candidate won't have the same set of questions about their ability to manage people. Or someone will raise a question about, well, they seem like they've moved around a lot in their career, but they have another candidate they're really excited about who has literally the same kind of movement in their career. And that's the slippery slope because, right, they're using evidence, right, but they're applying it in different ways. And as your critical friends and facilitators, we have to be listening for that, and you have to listen for that from each other to make sure that, as you said, you continue to be fair. And one of the hardest things about this is you have to be able to identify your bias and set it aside, because no matter what, it's unfair to the candidate. Even if it's a candidate of color and you're super excited about them, you go to a place where you're now rooting for them in certain ways. You're sending messages to them that they're doing well. You want them to do well. And that's also coming from bias in a certain kind of way. And what you want to do is to be present with the person and to be listening to what they're saying and doing, and not how they're making you feel. And that's the really hard part of screening candidates. And that's why this is so important to do this training. Thank you. Thanks, Sylvia. What about others? Anyone else want to share a thought or reaction?
Let's all say something. And speaking truth, I've dealt with a lot of bias since I've got here. I've only been on the board for about 5 months, and I've had a lot of arrows thrown at me pretty continuously because I speak out against our bias, our equity issues, and the white supremacy I see I'm dealing with. So, I mean, the reality, it's not happening because people are even bothering to hear me, they're not surprised that I have a voice and I'm intelligent. It's that it's not wanted. So that's what we're dealing with. And yeah, it's been a hard 5 months. And so we're dealing with this regularly. And what do we do with that? We need a lot more than this training, because I know this training is about how we apply this to hiring. But the reality is, I'm at a loss how we get there from where we're at right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Laurel. Gordon and then Maya.
I did have something to say, but it just kind of feels weird to have Laurel's comment and then like move on to the
Yeah.
next thing. I don't know if there's something you want to say about that, or.
Yeah, I appreciate Laurel's comment. She's speaking her truth and willing to say that's been her experience. And wondering, I was wondering if anyone in the group had a reaction or thought to share in response to Laurel. And thank you, Laurel, for speaking your truth. You know, a person's experience is their experience, right? It's how they feel treated. And it's important to know if anyone at the table is feeling somehow undervalued or not treated well, right? And back to Gordon's comment at the beginning about what are our rules of engagement and our shared agreements. I think it's really important to acknowledge the things that occur that cause that kind of damage. I see Judy, your hand is up. Did you want to respond?
I don't know if this is a response, but it's a thought to speak my truth related to that is that I think I feel like I need to understand how someone's voice feels elevated or welcomed or honored when that's I think what I feel. I mean, that's what I feel, but maybe the message or how things are communicated. So I don't know if it's a communication or language or words. So I know my intention, again, I've said this before, but I see a board of people that bring really amazing things to the table. And it really is hard for me to hear that, like when Laurel says her voice is discounted or not valued. So I would like to learn my role in that as well.
Thank you. Gordon, were you going to respond to Laurel?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that that I've seen some of the things that I think are as part of what she's mentioning, and I just think it's important. And there's the like, oh, all feelings are valid response, but I guess, you know, for me, it's been instructive. Sometimes we've had plenty of disagreements on the board, and I was here for 2 years before Laurel and Maya were elected, and I felt like I personally felt whatever, you know, yelled at, blah, 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 arguments, but I didn't feel condescended to in a way that I've sometimes seen. And I don't mean to, I'm not saying this because we need to, you know, dig at all of this now. I just want to acknowledge that some of the things that Laurel's describing are things that I've seen, and I don't think it's just, oh, this is somebody's experience and their feelings. And then I have something to say about something else, but I'll wait for other people to address this.
Thanks. I saw Maya and Alicia.
So I want to respond to Laurel and then get back in the queue to talk about the types of bias, how it comes into the interview process and our personal experiences. But I think one of the challenges with you know, trying to break down, I'll refer to it as I've heard it referred to by other folks in our community as being white supremacy culture, so that we remove it from the individuals and frame it within the context of just the broader dominant culture that not only is part of our greater community, but that also directly influences both historically and continues to the systems and the structure of any type of board work, whether it's school board or beyond school boards. It's not just white supremacy culture, it's also very patriarchal. It's something that just within itself, the structures prevent the intention of the individuals from moving from one place to the next. And it feels really important to recognize that that then translates into intention and impact having a completely different plane. They're not meeting, they're not on the same location. So, you know, I am, I don't know, I'm kind of like a ruthless believer in assume the best in people. And I really want to, but I also recognize that there are these constraints that unless we're really willing to break them down and move into a newly defined context. And to me, I've said it before, but to me, it's like, it's not about the nitty gritty, it's about creating a new culture. And I think that until then, what Laurel is describing, and even what Martina is describing, are gonna they're gonna persevere. They're not going to be able to be broken down. And it's sometimes easier to be reliant on what's familiar, whether it's process or whether it's structure, and to not dig deep into understanding why those things prevent the work from moving forward the way people are genuinely articulating as their reality, and to really accept that it is a reality and that it's our burden to carry to make that change. Like we're not going to do anything impactful on the level that I think every single one of us wants to do until we're really willing to examine the components that we've inherited, that we have the power, if we choose so, to let go of.
Thank you for that, Maya. Alicia, did you have a response to Laurel also?
Oh, I'm not sure I have a response to Laura. I just, you know, what are the takeaways, the learnings? So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I've said before, I think we are, as a board, on the cutting edge of this, and we can lead not just our board, but other elected boards if we take the time and do this work. You know, for me, when I hear Laurel explain that, say those things, I think, you know, how it feels. I know it's been used as an example before when you don't get service at a counter. And if you don't get service at a counter and you're a white, able-bodied person, man or woman, you just assume they don't see you. But I will tell you, as a person with a disability, I assume they've looked past me, and I have a whole different set of feelings. Or when somebody shushes me, which happened recently. We won't go into it. I will be getting therapy for it. But when that happens, it's got so much more there. And trying to, for me, be respectful of understanding there's so much more there. And my explanation or expectation or understanding, I have a responsibility to adjust that. But I think we have a responsibility as this board to have those discussions and to be able to say, not everything can change. There are rules and there are laws, there are personnel issues. There are things we just have to follow. And if we want to change them, we have to change them at a legislative level, or so those get confused. But I think, again, if we put our minds to it, we could be incredibly strong leaders in the community. And I'm hoping, you know what, I'm just hoping every elected board has the opportunity to elect people who are willing to speak up, who are willing to challenge, and maybe we can help them understand how the best to work through that. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. I just want to offer, and then Maya, I don't know if this was around the same topic. I want to give Laurel a chance to respond. Okay. I just wanted to offer, before I give Laurel a chance to respond, you know, Judy is asking, like, so what do we do? And this is, you know, something I grapple with as well, right? Like, a lot of these conversations are really uncomfortable. But, you know, I'm going to tell you something that happened, something I experienced when George Floyd was murdered by the police. The And I have to find out who it was, but I'm pretty sure he was the head of the police. He was a Black man in Minneapolis. And he said, to be silent is to be complicit. And we will not be complicit anymore. And, you know, I have since been, I have been a board member in a situation where I felt that other board members were mistreating our leader, the person we hired, and we're speaking in condescending ways. And we're sort of entitled to present in certain ways against this individual. And after George Floyd's murder, I said, I can't be silent. And that's frankly one of the most important things that anyone can do, right? Which is to say, if you see someone is being treated differently in some way, they're being interrupted more than others, they are spoken to in a way that feels disrespectful or condescending or different than how others are being spoken to. They're being questioned in ways that others aren't being questioned. That it's helpful for others to name the thing. This is what I'm noticing. Doesn't have to be judgmental about it, but so that the individual doesn't have to be the one owning it by themselves, right? That this is a shared community value. And that we know people might be doing that and not even realizing that they're doing it. And so anyway, I think, you know, really appreciate Alicia's statement about this is the work we have to do. And the work we have to do is to say, how do we all treat each other? And what does that mean about how we represent each other in the public space, in the private space, in our conversations, right? What are the things that we do? And how do we engage with one another? And it's really important because this matters for the way you show up for your superintendent as well. And, you know, with a commitment to a fair and open process, right? You have to be self-reflective on those things and make sure you're keeping people honest to those things. And I just want to acknowledge this group for being so open in this forum, because I think it speaks volumes to your ability to reach that common ground. I really do. And I want to invite if there are any other comments and would like Laurel as well, if you have anything else you want to share in response to your colleagues.
I guess I guess it's not in response because this is ongoing, and I appreciated a lot of the words said, and genuinely I appreciate anybody who's willing to be in the arena, which we've all chosen to do. I call it the person in the arena, not the man. But we've chosen to be that person, and it's not easy. But one reason I did choose it, I work for the government and I have to be quiet most days when this bias, which is inherent to the system, is present. But I've also am here as with a promise to myself, and you're so right mentioning George Floyd, because after Black Spring, I was like, this is the time for change, and I believe my voice can be heard. It is an absolute uphill struggle, but I don't discount the fact that we could change, move that needle on white supremacy, to create that awareness, to say what's happening, which I do on my Facebook page, about the white supremacy I deal with, and the labeling and the tone policing and the subjugation. It's not easy, but I do put it out there to say, hey, I don't want to bring this all to the meeting, but I need to talk about what's happening. So I do believe there can be change. I still believe it. The minute I don't, I can't be here, right? So I appreciate that we're all talking about it and we're going to continue doing the work. And when we say it is the work, it is the work, because once we figure a lot of this out and make equity, not just my skin color, but, you know, poverty, the kids that aren't heard, or the kids that aren't going to college, make everybody valued, we will be so strong as a district. Because once we raise some people up, we're raising everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laurel. Sydney, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess some of the thoughts that I'm having are around this idea of how kind of the posturing of leadership in the mainstream is often leaning towards this sense of like infallibility or invulnerability, right? Like this posturing of being unfazed and unaffected, and that reflecting emotions and concern and feeling can be construed as weakness in the sense of what leadership is in the structures that uphold society. And we often leave our emotions and our sense of life at the door to posture in a way that we are making calculated decisions, then we are making purely statistical decisions, data-driven, that have no foundation in our emotional subjectivity and our sense of personal bias, right? And what we're trying to illuminate here is that bias is a part of the human experience. There is no way to entirely strip bias from our experience, because every single one of us is a unique story that comes into the room, and we are a multiplicity of experiences and identities that can't just be stripped from each other. And so we come with privilege, and we come with our own experiences of oppression, whatever those be. The most privileged person in the room still has their struggle. Nobody gets out of life unscathed from this experience of life. And that's something that we really need to remember and hold on to when we are conversing and having conversations about decisions that affect all of us, is that all of us are fallible. All of us have the opportunity to feel something really deep inside of us. And it doesn't do any of us justice to pretend like that doesn't exist. But what is also important to remember is that there are some things structurally in the system that require people of color to push far harder through struggles and these narratives that go on, these socialized stereotypes. People of color have to push far harder every day to show up in the same level-headed way that everybody else comes into the room. And that's something that is structural. That's something that is important to remember about the ways that we understand one another, that our cultural upbringing is a part of a historical upbringing that brought us all into the melting pot that is America. And there's no pretending that we are on even ground when we all come from such distinct, differentiated backgrounds. And so there's a power dynamic involved, and there's a distrust, an inherent distrust that exists in the room, and there are vulnerabilities and extra armor that we have to put up depending on where you come from. And so I just wanted to name that as leaders, and particularly those who make decisions on behalf of children, it's important to demonstrate that we understand that children are human beings, and we are the product of what children become. And if we're trying to develop children as whole human beings, we also need to have the humility to hold each other with that kind of consideration and care for the whole person that's in the room with you. The emotions, the difficulties, the challenges, and lend space to each other to be vulnerable. Because that's what's going to bring the humanity out that generates the kinds of decisions that are sustainable for our spirit as human beings, and not just push us closer to the AIs and the robotic nature of the future that we're slowly stepping into. So I just wanted to name that. And I think all of you, I just commend all of you already for being as vulnerable as you are, especially in a public forum. So thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. I really appreciate that. All right, I know there were a couple other comments earlier. Anything else anyone wants to share at this point? Maya, and then I know Gordon had a comment earlier too. Yes.
I just, I want to have us really, kind of dig deep into this notion of bias and how we process bias, and not just recognizing the types of bias, but really challenging whether biases are something to build a new narrative around. And I think of, and I'll use myself as an example, that maternal bias, that every time I introduce myself and I'm given the opportunity to write a biography, I intentionally start my biography off with, I am a mother. And it's partly to reclaim that and to take that away from anybody who's going to turn it into a cause for bias. And perhaps it's because I come from, and I know I don't mean to make a stereotype, but the Latinx culture that I personally come from is very matriarchal. It can look on a surface like it's a patriarchal culture, but when it's behind closed doors, it is the mother who is the leader. And so for me, the concept of like mother-like traits, I want us to really dig deep into even, like, I want us to recognize them as we're interviewing and whatnot, but to not recognize them as something to set aside, but to like flip and even celebrate. So like you gave the example of seeming, what was the word? Was it aggressive or intimidating, right? So in a different context, somebody else would be like, hell yeah, I'm intimidating. And yet for some reason, we're taught to consider that as something that would be cause for, and I don't mean to put that on you to define whether your relationship to intimidating, but intimidating is, in some contexts, it's how things are done, right? Like I played soccer for years. If somebody told me I was intimidating, I'd be like, you're right. And that's why I got it done. So I just want us to think about the biases as we're processing them and really think deeply as like, is this something that we can like follow the narrative of assuming that we need to resist? Or can we also redefine it as something that has merit for us to celebrate as strengths and ways of seeing leadership in a structure that is so different than what has dominated the scene for so long? So that's just, so for me going into interviews, I want to think about it that way. And it takes me back to, what was his name? Dustin, right? Like my initial reaction was like, I'm not gonna like this guy, even before he started. and instead, I need to slow down and think, I just wanna like redefine my relationship to the bias that made me turned off before he even started talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Laurel, and then I would love, Mary, we haven't heard from you in a little bit, and so I'd love to invite you into the conversation if there's anything that you're interested in sharing. But Laurel, go ahead, and then Judy.
I just have a short, I look at bias and I think I talk about this with some of my clients. Triggers. We talk about triggers a lot in our society, things that trigger us, but a lot of that is absolutely linked to bias. And what you talked about earlier is kind of these categories of things that triggers are things that before you're having a cognitive thought, you're already reacting, right? And so that's where biases sits in that realm. And not all triggers are bad. Really, it's the awareness of that you're having this trigger that is helpful. Like, okay, I may be going down this route, but I can stop this. So we have the ability to look at this and go, the example I use a lot is my ex-husband is a military veteran from the war, and he was embarrassed because he hit the ground at a gas station from a car backfiring, and he was super embarrassed. And this always makes me tear up, so sorry, but I said to him, that trigger got you home to your babies. It's not a bad thing. So the reality is knowing that we have these reactions and why they happen, and then going, I'm not a bad person because of them, but I may have some stuff to work on here. It's super important. So I was going to be shorter than that, but.
Thank you, Laurel. Judy?
That's really true, Laurel. I do think sometimes our triggers are what we really learn the most from, for sure. But I just wanted to comment a little bit on what Maya is saying, because sometimes in hiring, and Sydney's comments, that some of the ways we think people are supposed to be when interviewing for certain positions like superintendent or whatever, I think there is, I really think we consciously need to look at things that we really value. Like, to me, valuing the fact that someone could have a family and have a responsible job and do the work well. Wow, that's really more of a complete, I mean, when you think of someone in the context of who they are, you really get more of a position, a picture of who they are. But I was thinking about Dustin, and I was thinking about the roles that people think they have to play, because my reaction, as I said earlier about Dustin, was not, it was ingenuous, and he just seemed like disingenuous. And he seemed like someone who somehow felt like, this is how I'm supposed to present myself as a male, maybe looking for a job in some area. And it actually, sometimes it's easy to see right through that, but people then put on these roles that really can be off-putting or and not really who they are. So I think that's what really turned me off to him, was thinking he's acting in a way he thinks that I want him to act, and that's going to pull me in.
Yeah, and I think kind of tying together what you're sharing with what Laurel was saying, for us, it's the awareness that you had that reaction, right? And then being able to set it aside and still listen to what he has to say, as opposed to thinking this is a disingenuous person and hearing everything through that lens, and that's the hard part. Mary, I wanted to invite you into the conversation. Is there anything you want to share?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to share and comment on. I don't know that this is the place, because we're working with you to hire, recruit and hire a superintendent. It seems like what we're really touching on is a lot of deeper issues and, the elephant in the room of what I did back in December. So I don't know that I want to comment on that here, but I guess, what I heard you say, Monica, is part of the reason that I did what I did, because to be silent is to be complicit. And I think I can agree with what other board members have said. I certainly understand the systemic issues we have, not only in our system, but the whole education system. Our whole country is built on racism and inequality. I understand that intellectually. Obviously, my lived experiences are different than other people's. But what I would like to see us talk about, and again, this isn't the spot to do it, is let's talk about the system injustices, and let's not focus on individuals and attacking individuals. That's what bothers me. And the vitriol, because I really do want to hear what people have to say. Tell me what your ideas are. Tell me how we're going to solve this problem together. But when it's just vitriol and this toxic attacking of people, it bothers me. And that's why I felt compelled to speak up, because silence, as you said, is complicity. And I don't want to say anything else at this point, because I don't want it to get us off track.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. And as we said, we're going to expect and accept non-closure. And so there, I appreciate that everyone's naming there's more work to do, and hope that you'll be able to come together to discuss those things. Thank you. And thank you, Mary, for sharing, bringing your voice into the conversation. So I'm going to come back now to what we want to be doing around bias and how our process mitigates bias. And interestingly, Laurel, we've got the word trigger in there, right? So for some of us, there are things when we meet someone make us feel good, warm, and fuzzy, and some things make us feel angry or negative. And those feelings cause us to either overrate or underrate people. And the best ways really to address bias, one is to name your bias when you're having it. And so in our process, as we're discussing candidates, we want to build a practice of being able to say, I need to name that I have a bias. This is what it is. And then that's out on the table, and everyone can acknowledge that and take that into mind with your assessment of the individual. The other thing is to really keep each other focused on the evidence. What did the person actually say and do? And to keep yourself focused on the evidence. So we pay a lot of attention to taking copious notes if we can during the interviews. Sometimes, I recently interviewed a candidate, and the whole time I just thought, I just don't know about this person. So I didn't score them until I reread everything they said, because I had to assess what they said and not like that sort of whatever that gut thing that was kind of getting in the way of me being able to just listen to them. I had, Alicia, you shared your story about being disabled, and something that took me several years to be aware of. As I mentioned earlier, my son, who's now 17 years old, has high functioning autism. And with high functioning autism, there's not a lot of eye contact or catching social cues. And I realized when I interview candidates who aren't great at eye contact or aren't catching social cues, I find them endearing. And I'm rooting for them, and I want them to do well. And I'm thinking, we can find a way. There's a role we can make it work. We can make something work. And even in the rooting for them, I'm being unfair to those candidates, because I'm making all sorts of presumptions and assumptions about them and who they are and their readiness for the role. And now I've left the conversation. I've left the interview, and I'm no longer listening to what they actually have to say. So all that to say, biases can be positive or negative, and either way, you want to be able to set them aside. Go ahead, Gordon.
Thanks. I have a question about, in the whole thing of trying to separate facts from impressions or competencies from style or something. In some things it seems like fairly easy to do, like it's kind of concrete, but I think a bunch of the things that probably all of us will put on our list have to do with communication. Well, we want to have, better partnership with staff and more open communication with communities and, stuff like that. And that is a really hard thing to say, all right, here's the fact and here's the style. And so I want to ask you how you deal with that. And I guess it's one of the, not that we need to decide this tonight, but it's one of the things that makes me think that we should either visit or at least talk to people in the community where a candidate is coming from, to hear from other people, like, do they think this actually happened? Because it's hard, if you want to say, oh, did you raise third grade reading scores? There's numbers. But effective communication, it's hard to judge it without making a superficial impression. So what guidance do you have about that?
Yeah, so something like communication style is a real slippery slope, because again, it's getting to our expected and unexpected behaviors. And someone, for some that might mean enthusiasm or being extroverted or having a, bouncy personality. And for others, it means, being serious. You yourself said Sandra seemed like she had other things on her mind to offer and share. And that felt, that gave that like gave you a sense of trust. Others notice that she's the only one who didn't say hi, and that really bothers them, you know, somehow think she's not warm. She's not as warm as and I think it was Andrew. And so what we have to do is to design an interview process that allows them to demonstrate that skill set, not just how they present themselves in the interview, but how they've actually done things that test out the thing you're looking for. So we'll have another session to design the screening process, but it's all about that. And I think actually I'm going to move us because I think this sort of starts to get to your question. We want to all be clear on the competencies that we're seeking. That is the foundation and basis of everything that we do. And we want to create a screening process that is evidence-based. It's not trying to trick people into making a mistake so that we got them. It's actually setting people up to show their best selves and creating a process that's fair. So what we have found time and time again, and Alma has designed principal screening processes, teacher screening processes, and of course, executive search. What we found over and over and over again is when you have a competency-driven process and it's structured, you elevate the rigor of the screening. And we just see time and time again, more diverse candidates make it through the stages of the process. And the only reason is because our process has mitigated bias. So the things like communication style can work against certain candidates. When we're focused on evidence, we really get to the kind of the heart of the matter and less about their style. So we kind of have to navigate that. And you'll be able to see, Gordon, as we're designing the process, how we do that. We also will always want to have more than one interviewer with the candidate and try to have different ways of assessing candidates, because we then kind of get a more well-rounded picture, and we have different people getting to see people in different settings. And that's really important. Maya?
So I know I identified that this is a challenge for me. So I apologize, and I don't necessarily need closure, but I do want to call attention to the fact that I believe some harm was just done. I'm seeing Laurel is gone, and I'm really uncomfortable with where that went. And I'm seeing competency and evidence-based process, and I'm kind of sitting here uncomfortable with a pretty bold statement that was made that really challenges the genuine place that Laurel was coming from sharing. If we know anything about Laurel, it's that she's incredibly straightforward, and to put words into her mouth feels as though there's some harm that's been caused, and it makes me pause, not because I need closure, because I'm not sure we will ever get there, but because it makes me concerned about moving forward with an interview process when, as a team, we're not extending that courtesy to each other. And I just want to say that out loud. I don't want Laurel to have to say that, but I have some deep concerns about making assumptions instead of extending grace to people and trusting that they're communicating honestly and straightforwardly, and that there isn't anything that's being implied. It's all being shared with vulnerability and with a desire to move in a forward direction, not in a backward one.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you naming the discomfort. And I'm just wondering if anyone has a response or a reaction to what Maya is sharing.
I'm also really comfortable with people sitting with my words. I don't necessarily need a reaction. I honestly don't expect one. So I appreciate you giving the opportunity, but I also want folks to know that my words can stand by themselves. They don't necessarily need to be responded to. I'm working on that closure thing.
I did see Gordon come off mute. Did you want to say something, Gordon?
No, it's okay. Thanks.
All right. So let me ask you all something. Several of you have said tonight there's an issue around trust. There's been some damage done in certain ways. What next steps would you like to agree to be able to engage in that kind of work as a board? Alicia?
Yeah, just curious, and I don't have access to everybody. Did we actually lose some board members? Did they step away? Because is this the time to take a break and a breath and come back? Because I think it's big work. It's not, you're not gonna paint over it.
Yeah.
So I just want everybody's voices in the room. And if we have to do some work to get us there, that's what's important to me.
And we have been going for a while, actually. I kind of forgot about breaks for a minute there. Gordon, what were you going to say?
I also see Laurel's not in the room. I'm not sure that that's because we've been gone too long. When we talk about creating, what do we say? I don't know, like ground rules, like how we're going to go about this, even if we disagree, it feels to me that characterizing somebody who's speaking up about equity as vitriol is one of the things I think would be good to avoid. And we don't have to get into it, but if we at some point we have to be able to go forward, I think, without that kind of thing.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, Alicia?
So I think, I don't know how we move forward. You ask about that. I've been on the board the longest, and it's been a rough year. I felt, I had to let go of some things that felt very, very personal, and that hurt our students as well. I had to look at my role in that, how I would want to do things differently, how I want to even have a conversation. Again, it's very powerful stuff we're dealing with, and we aren't just covering it up. So that's the good news, I guess. That's the painful news. I think it's been suggested we have a chance to have this conversation in a retreat of some sort. I'd love to get a chance to do that before we do the hiring. That's I think how we do the next step, and who facilitates that, I'm not sure, or how we do that. I'm not sure. It'd be great to, it's hard to get real and talk about things when you've got a radio audience and you don't know who's there. But I don't think any of it, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't like the way it feels. I didn't like the way it felt to get called out, the way it felt when I was so passionate about wanting to include LGBTQI on our equity tool. And it still stings. And that's just one little piece in one little meeting. And so how do we forgive each other? How do we move forward? How do we say we're doing our best and we'll continue to do our best? And you know what? Maybe our best isn't good enough, and maybe we need help. But I'm sad that we aren't all on the call. And so I, again, would love to take the break so we can get everybody on the call. And also, as some of you might know, so I get the last word. Oh, darn, Gordon's hand is up. Oh, anyway, if we can take a break, that would be great.
Sorry, that was.
And then, Judy, maybe you can check in with Laurel and make sure it's not, that everybody feels comfortable coming back, because we're making big assumptions. That's why she left. I turned off my camera so I could eat potato chips, but I'm feeling that's not the reason. So thanks.
I think it is a moment to take a breath and take a break. You okay with that, Monica?
Absolutely. And we're all, let's do that. We're nearing the end of our content anyway, but also why don't we take a break? How long would you like, Judy?
It's 7:46 right now. Let's take about a 7-minute break. How's that? So come back at 4 minutes after. Oh, wait, no, 7, 7, or 14. I can't do the math. How about we come back at 7:55?
You get an extra minute there. Thanks so much, everyone. 7:55. So it looks like we're all back. Oh, actually, no, I see Maya's. Oh, there's Maya. Laurel. Laurel, are you still on the line? Judy, did you want to make any statements?
Well, I would like it if Laurel would, I mean, if Laurel returned, I don't feel comfortable. I mean, I think at least in reflecting back on what was said and other conversations I've had with Laurel, and what I've heard is that the way Mary made her comments, I think Laurel felt as if that was an attack. I don't know, Maya. I mean, without Laurel here, I don't know. I think it's an important conversation because I don't know there was any intent for that at all. So I don't know where to go.
Okay, got it. I got it. So I'm sorry that we lost Laurel. I see she's not on the meeting anymore.
I just want to say there was no intent. I was just trying to express my feelings. Monica, you asked to share it. I said I was reluctant to do that, but I wanted the group to know what I was thinking. I'm not trying to blame or characterize anybody. I'm just telling you how I feel and what my motivation were. And I really think this is not the place to talk about it, because we're here to talk about hiring a superintendent, not to work on our individual issues as a board. And so that was not my intent. I am sorry if Laurel took it that way. You know, we need to figure out what's going on and work as a group. And that's what I want to do. That's what I want to have the conversation about.
Yeah, go ahead, Gordon.
I mean, you know, I don't know quite how to say this, but with all due respect, you can't call somebody's comments vitriol and then say you didn't mean to characterize them. And I think that it's true. We're here to figure out how to hire a superintendent.
I did not call her vitriol. I said the remarks were vitriol. I never called her out specifically. So you need to understand what I was saying.
That's what I said. Her remark, what she said. Did I get that wrong? Well, I don't know. I was about to say, obviously, we're here to hire a superintendent, but we're talking about equity issues, and it's at some point, obviously, it relates to other things going on and how we work with each other.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think Alicia's got her hand up. I'm not sure where to go with this right now.
Okay. Go ahead, Alicia. Maya.
Okay. Well, here's what I would like to suggest. I'd like to suggest we aren't going to have closure, and I'm a firm believer. What is it? If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And we need to go far, and so I think we need to go together. And I'm not really comfortable talking about how Laurel feels or doesn't feel, and who said what, and there's a lot of that going on where things are posted where names weren't used, but we know where it was intended. This isn't okay. It's not okay with me. And I don't think it's okay with everybody else. We're just in this cycle. So would it be possible to just pause the meeting? We'll come back, maybe try to do this at a later time. Because I just think we're spiraling too far away from where we should be. So that's my thought, Judy. I would like to propose that we end the meeting early.
I think without all the board members here and I think that is what we need to do. And I think we need to figure out how not to get to this place over and over. And I'm open to ideas from people on the board if they would let me know. And I don't know if Alma, if finishing this training for our hiring is critically important, but I think there is a barrier right now in order to be able to actually finish that.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just have to figure out better timing.
Okay. Maya?
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, and I know I've been asking the board to do this since before I was even a board member, but I think that we would benefit from having some anti-racist training with Aisha Elliott. I think that she does some wonderful work focused specifically on institutional racism, and I think that starting at that point is where we could begin to have the conversation that needs to happen. I think that, so that's my recommendation for work that we could do and should do, especially considering a lot of the other work, even beyond hiring a superintendent. I think that it's really important. We hear over and over and over again that presenting ourselves as a united front is what we need to do in order to pull in a superintendent. And I think that we all need to take responsibility for our roles in that breakdown. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's presented in a way, not just by us as a collective board or as individual board members, but even messaging coming from the community that really lends itself to supporting the idea that by calling out that which we consider problematic, that calling out is the point of problem, as opposed to the behavior that leads to something being called out. So,
I've heard the expression calling in, and I think that's what this board needs to do. I mean, it is identifying things, but it's calling it in with a commitment to figure this out together. And I will definitely, and I've heard your recommendation, and I really will reach out to about the trainings. But I wonder, we went into this with training in mind, and it's important training, and so is the training that we can get probably in other places, but we still will be coming back to how we're interacting. And so I think somehow we have to deal with that directly. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts on that. I think we need training, but we also need more than training.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. And, that was my sense, even in I think everyone was pretty open about that right at the start of the meeting. I'm sorry we took a left turn there, but I agree with Alicia. And I think, oh, there you are. Hi, Alicia. It makes sense. I don't think we pretty much, just so you know, covered a big majority of what we needed to cover around bias, and we will have more conversations as we co-construct and design the screening process together. The Alma team is going to send out a couple of articles as food for thought, and work that you can do before we meet again. So we'll get some of those things together. It would be really important to look at the job description that's out there and just make sure you agree with the competencies that are there, and contact either Sylvia or myself or Sydney. We all have the same first name at Alma Advisory Group. If you have anything that you're feeling as a board member you think is important that's missing or that hasn't been made explicit enough. This is your work. It's difficult work. It's important work. And the only thing that I will say is it is important to listen to each other and to honor each other, right? And so if someone feels a certain way about what was said about them, then let's try to understand why it hit them a certain way and what can we do in the future to avoid that sense of conflict. I agree with Judy. I think that's really the work that has to be done from here. So I do want to thank you all, though, for being with us, for speaking your truth, for saying what was there for you, for exploring these difficult topics together. And I do think that the very naming of the issue is the first step towards overcoming it and having a breakthrough with it so that you can all be a unified team, because your students are counting on you to do that, and your staff and your families. So thank you so much for your time this evening. We'll go ahead and end. I wish you all the very best, and we'll look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and the meeting is officially adjourned at 8:08. And thank you for everyone for your participation. I'm truly sorry it ended this way, but I hope it will be a beginning for our next step.
Bye-bye.